The survival of Mary Vincent. Left for dead, she crawled back to life. In September of 1978, a young woman stood alone on a stretch of highway in California, thumb out, trusting that the next car to stop would carry her closer to home. She had no way of knowing that the decision to accept a ride would place her face to face with one of the most violent criminals of the era. What followed was an act meant to erase her existence. But Mary Vincent refused to disappear. This is not a story about brutality. It is a story about will, about memory, about a survivor who defied impossible odds, identified her attacker, and forced a broken system to reckon with its failures. This is the survival of Mary Vincent. Mary Vincent was just 18 years old in the summer of 1978. She was independent, strong-willed, and determined to make her own way in the world. After a disagreement at home, Mary decided to travel, believing that distance might bring clarity. Like many young people of that era, she hitchhiked. It was a common practice at the time, especially along California's highways. People trusted strangers more easily. The dangers were not yet fully understood. Mary carried little more than hope and determination. On the night of September 29th, a van pulled over. The driver seemed ordinary, friendly, calm. Mary accepted the ride. What began as a normal conversation slowly shifted. The driver's tone changed. His demeanor darkened. Mary realized something was wrong. What followed was a violent attack intended to silence her forever. The goal was not just harm, it was erasure. But something extraordinary happened. Mary did not give up. Despite unimaginable injury, she refused to lose consciousness. She focused on survival, on staying present, on remembering details. The color of the van, the driver's voice, his face. These details would later save lives. After the attack, Mary was abandoned in a remote area, far from help. The man who hurt her believed she could not survive. He was wrong. Mary assessed her surroundings. She understood that waiting meant death. She made a decision that few humans ever have to make. She would move. With extraordinary determination, Mary began crawling toward the nearest road. Every movement required immense effort. Every moment tested her will to live. She did not scream. She conserved energy. She focused on one thing only: getting back. The journey back to civilization took hours. Mary crossed rough terrain, guided only by instinct and the distant sounds of traffic. Pain threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed through it. At dawn, she reached the roadside. Drivers passed without stopping. Finally, one vehicle slowed. A couple saw her and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. They did not hesitate. They helped her and called for emergency services. Mary had survived what was meant to be fatal. But survival was only the beginning. At the hospital, doctors worked urgently to save Mary's life. Throughout treatment, she remained alert, focused. She asked for a police officer. When detectives arrived, Mary described her attacker in remarkable detail. She recalled his appearance, his voice, his vehicle. Her clarity stunned investigators. Despite trauma, despite exhaustion, her memory did not fade. It sharpened. Police compiled a lineup. Mary studied each face carefully. She did not rush. When her eyes landed on one man, she stopped. That's him. The suspect was Lawrence Singleton, a convicted criminal who had already served time for violent offenses. Mary's identification was immediate and unwavering. It would lead to his arrest. In court, Mary faced the man who tried to erase her. She did not avert her eyes. She testified calmly, clearly, powerfully. Her testimony left the courtroom silent. The jury found Singleton guilty. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But the system was about to reveal its deepest flaw. Despite the severity of the crime, Singleton received a sentence that stunned the public: 14 years in prison. At the time, California law limited sentencing options. There were no life sentences for crimes like this. Mary watched as the man who nearly killed her was guaranteed eventual freedom. The trauma did not end. It transformed. Mary Vincent refused to be defined by what was done to her. She learned to live again, to adapt, to reclaim her independence. She became an advocate, speaking openly about survival, resilience, and the need for legal reform. Her voice mattered. People listened. In 1987, Lawrence Singleton was released from prison. Mary warned authorities. She warned the public. She knew what he was capable of. Her warnings were dismissed. Less than 2 years later, Singleton attacked again, this time killing a woman named Roxanne Hayes. The tragedy reignited national outrage. Mary's survival story became proof of a systemic failure. Singleton was finally sentenced to death for the later murder. Though the sentence was later overturned on technical grounds, he would never walk free again. Mary's courage had saved others. Even if the system lagged, truth had prevailed. Mary Vincent never sought fame. She sought change. Her story forced lawmakers, courts, and communities to confront uncomfortable realities. Sentencing failures, victim silencing, survivor resilience. She proved that survival is not just physical. It is psychological, legal, moral. Mary's story is often reduced to headlines. But she is not a symbol. She is a person, a woman who remembered when forgetting would have been easier, spoke when silence was expected, lived when death was assumed. Her survival changed how crimes were prosecuted and how victims were heard. Decades later, Mary Vincent's survival remains one of the most powerful testimonies ever recorded. Not because of what was done to her, but because of what she did afterward. She lived. She spoke. She changed the system. Mary Vincent was left for dead. Instead, she returned to life carrying truth. Her survival reminds us that violence does not define victims. Memory can be justice. One voice can expose a broken system, and sometimes survival itself becomes an act of resistance. This was the survival of Mary Vincent, a story not of horror, but of endurance, accountability, and courage. If you want more responsible, in-depth true crime stories centered on understanding rather than exploitation, subscribe to Mystery Grid. Because every story is a puzzle, and some are solved by the will to survive.